the Whispering Gate of Forgotten Priests. The ruin stands where three ridges meet, like the folds of a clenched hand, in a valley that never seems to echo. Locals call it the Whispering Gate, a name older than any map, passed down through shepherds and wanderers who swore that the stone threshold murmured under a moonless sky. Today it lies half swallowed by earth, nothing more than a weathered arch sunk into a slope of shale. But when archaeologists first uncovered it in the 1920 seconds, they realized they were not dealing with a simple doorway. This was an entrance crafted with almost ceremonial precision limestone blocks fitted so tightly that not even a razor could slip between them, each face carved with fading sigils no one had ever catalogued before. The earliest reliable excavation records place the structure somewhere between 1200 and 900 BCE, but even that estimate shifts depending on which tool marks a researcher chooses to trust. The region held several pastoral communities in that period, yet none are known for the architectural ambition required to shape stone this way. Nearby, scattered among the roots of old pines, were fragments of ceramic vessels decorated with ochre spirals. Some matched the style of hilltop shrines used by early ascetic priesthoods. Others appeared entirely out of place, as if created by a people who passed through briefly and never returned. At the heart of the mystery lies a single stone slab that once sealed the arch. It weighs nearly 2 tons, yet it shows no groove, hinge, or mechanical fit. The slab was simply there, wedged into place, as though the builders intended it never to be moved again. And yet someone did move it, long before modern excavation. The interior soil revealed traces of ancient disturbance, compressed layers, charcoal flecks, and the faintest outline of a torch mark on the ceiling. Whoever visited the chamber, they came with fire. Inside, the chamber is surprisingly small, barely large enough for 4 people to stand. At its center sits a shallow basin, carved directly from the bedrock, its edges smoothed by what appears to be centuries of human touch. When researchers rinsed the bowl with distilled water, flakes of a reddish mineral loosened from the interior. Tests identified it as cinnabar, a substance prized in ancient ritual for its vivid color and for its toxicity. These priests, whoever they were, worked with materials that walked the line between sacred and lethal. The quirky detail buried in expedition notes tells an even stranger story. One researcher reported that the arch emitted a faint hum when the wind passed through the valley at certain angles. Another believed the architects intentionally shaped the threshold to resonate like a low flute. Nothing supernatural, just acoustics. But that hum, amplified in total darkness, could have fed the idea of voices whispering from the gate. Such impressions linger easily in communities who lived close to death, drought, and the uncertainty of early ritual life. Still, scholars debate whether the chamber served as an initiation site, a place of trance, or something more cryptic. The cinnabar residue hints at painted rites, perhaps markings on the skin. The absence of bones or offerings complicates things. Shrines typically hold remnants of devotion, but this one is strangely empty. Some argue that its emptiness was intentional, that the priests worshipped silence itself. Others suggest it was cleared by looters centuries ago, leaving nothing but the structure's quiet defiance of time. And then there is the matter of the inscriptions. The faint sigils etched into the stones resemble no full writing system, yet they recur with such pattern that they cannot be decorative. A few symbols appear near the basin, arranged like a sequence, perhaps instructions, perhaps warnings. Attempts to link them to neighboring cultures always falter. There is just enough similarity to tempt comparison, but never enough to confirm translation. Scholars still debate whether these signs belong to a known people who experimented briefly with symbolic ritual, or a group that vanished before its language could root itself in history. Standing at the foot of the Whispering Gate today, one feels the peculiar weight of unfinished stories. The chamber, the cinnabar, the hum in the wind, each element makes sense on its own, yet none quite explains the others. And so the ruin remains what it has been for thousands of years, a threshold that opens onto questions rather than answers, whispering not through magic but through the gaps in our understanding. The blackened manuscript of the wandering stars. When scholars speak of enigmatic texts, they usually refer to manuscripts smudged by time or languages lost through conquest and decay. But the artifact known as the blackened manuscript of the wandering stars came to researchers already wounded, its edges charred, its vellum brittle as autumn leaves, and its ink warped into a palette of rusted browns and ghostly greys. It surfaced in 1894, discovered inside the collapsed cellar of a merchant's house in eastern Anatolia. The home had burned centuries earlier, leaving behind little more than ash, pottery shards, and, remarkably, this single codex tucked within a clay storage jar as though someone had tried too late to save it. The manuscript itself is small, no bigger than a traveller's diary. Radiocarbon testing firmly anchors it between 400 and 600 CE, though some argue it may be older, copied and recopied from earlier sources. What makes it extraordinary are the diagrams scattered throughout its pages, delicate wheels, spirals, and intersecting lines that seem to track the movements of celestial bodies. Most early medieval astronomy was practical marking seasons, predicting harvests, but this manuscript's charts show an obsessive precision. One page depicts the progression of a lunar eclipse, not as a simple darkening arc, but broken into 8 careful stages, each accompanied by a symbol that repeats elsewhere in the text, like whispered punctuation. At first glance, the writing resembles Syriac, but only in the way a dream resembles its waking source. The strokes follow familiar rhythms, yet refuse to resolve into recognizable words. Some believe it's a cipher, a protective veil over knowledge intended only for an initiated circle. Others suspect an esoteric dialect used by a fringe monastic sect, the sort who blended astronomy with mysticism, insisting the heavens were not merely clocks, but messengers. The manuscript's most unsettling feature appears midway through, on a page almost completely blackened. Amid the soot, researchers found a diagram of a star 8 points, each elongated like a blade. Beneath it, faint but discernible, lies a short line of text. It doesn't match any other script in the book. Its angles are sharper, its rhythm fractured. One scholar suggested it might be a later annotation, someone revisiting the codex during a period of turmoil, perhaps adding a warning or prophecy. But others noticed that the ink beneath the charring is the same shade as the rest. If it was added later, it was added long before the fire. The quirky detail that most researchers gloss over comes from the last owner before the manuscript reached a university archive. The merchant's descendant, a dignified man with a storyteller's affection for flourishes, claimed his grandfather believed the book shifted when no one was looking. Not physically, no pages turning on their own, but that the diagrams appeared slightly altered from time to time. A curve where there had been an angle, a symbol elongated by a fraction. Scholars dismiss this, of course. Heat damage can create illusions. Changing humidity can curl parchment. But the tale lingers, if only because the manuscript seems almost too eager to resist interpretation. And interpretation remains its greatest challenge. Scholars still debate whether the diagrams genuinely map planetary movement or reflect ritual calendars aligned with night vigils, fasts, and celestial omens. One camp argues the manuscript records a sect devoted to wandering stars, a term ancient astronomers used for planets, but mystics repurposed to refer to wayward spirits. Another camp insists the text is scientific, not spiritual, and that the symbols are proto-notations of astronomical events long forgotten by mainstream chronology. Even stranger are the scorch marks themselves. Fire typically consumes vellum unevenly, yet the manuscript's burn pattern is almost symmetrical, a halo of black around the edges, as though the flames licked inward but hesitated before touching the diagrams. Forensic analysis suggests the fire was intense enough to carbonize wood beams, yet several of the book's inner pages remained pristine, unwarped by heat. Was it simply luck? A quirk of how the jar insulated the manuscript? Or did the codex's narrow survival hint at its role in the household kept close at hand until the final moments of panic when someone tucked it away for safekeeping? Today, the codex rests in a climate-controlled vault, its pages flattened and protected, though still delicate. Light exposure is restricted. Scholars schedule their access months in advance. Each time they open the cover, they confront the same contradiction. A text filled with the language of stars yet marred by fire, preserved only by an accident of desperation. And in that tension between knowledge and ruin lies its true mystery. It is a book that seems to have travelled across centuries, carrying a voice no one can quite hear, one that continues to challenge, defy, and, in its own quiet way, provoke the darkest kind of wonder. The silent brotherhood of the veiled coast. Along the storm-carved edge of the northern Atlantic lies a stretch of shoreline locals called the Veiled Coast, a place where fog rolls in, not as mist but as a shifting wall, rising and collapsing like a living thing. This is where fishermen, centuries ago, spoke of a brotherhood that kept no records and offered no welcome. Men who walked the cliffs at night carrying lanterns with covers etched in spirals, and who vanished before the first gull cried at dawn. Their existence was long dismissed as folklore, another tale shaped by fear, isolation, and the ocean's habit of stealing lives without explanation. But in the summer of 1978, a group of archaeologists surveying erosion damage uncovered what turned out to be the first material proof these stories were rooted in something far older. The find was a carved opening in a limestone cliff, sealed by a slab of driftwood petrified into stone-hard density after centuries of salt and wind. Behind it lay a chamber that descended in 2 sharp steps, so narrow a grown adult had to turn sideways to pass. At the chamber's base, the team found 3 small altars, each carved from granite, hauled from a quarry almost 60 kilometers inland, a puzzling choice for a coastal site. The altars bore no soot, no burn marks, no offerings. Instead, each had an indentation shaped like a shallow bowl, but smooth as marble and polished through use. The absence of typical ritual debris confounded researchers. This was not a place for feasting or sacrifice. It was, it seemed, a site devoted to silence. The mainstream fact that anchors this discovery is clear. Strata surrounding the chamber firmly place its usage between 700 and 1100 CE, predating the earliest written references to monastic orders in the region. Yet the chamber's design mirrors certain early Celtic hermit cells, single entry, acoustically precise, and oriented toward natural light in a way that amplifies calm. When sunlight grazes the entrance at certain angles, it reflects down the stairwell and strikes the altars in thin golden lines. The effect is almost theatrical, as though crafted for a select audience prepared to read meaning in the way light behaves. But the real puzzle sits just beyond the chamber, in a tunnel so cramped that only one person can crawl through it at a time. It leads to what researchers call the listening room, a cramped stone bubble carved out of a natural pocket in the cliff. Its walls are etched with hundreds of parallel lines, each barely thicker than a fingernail. Some archaeologists believe the lines might represent years spent in solitary devotion, like tally marks from cloistered practitioners. Others think they reflect tidal patterns, with monks recording the ocean's pulse to predict storms. It's the quirky detail from a diver's log in 1982 that deepens the mystery. While mapping the cliff base during low tide, he reported hearing a low, flute-like tone emerging from the rocks whenever a wave struck the hollow beneath the chamber. The acoustics created a natural instrument, an eerie resonance that once might have signaled something to the people waiting above. Whether they interpreted it as a message from the sea or simply a rhythm for meditation remains unclear. Still, the image of silent figures listening to the ocean's breath through stone is difficult to forget. Scholars still debate whether the so-called Silent Brotherhood was an organized sect or a loose collection of devotees who sought refuge from political turmoil. Some propose they were astronomer monks, observing celestial events over the ocean's unobstructed horizon. Others believe they watched for omens, tracking the interplay between moonlight and tide. Still, others argue the chambers could have served as an early warning system for storms' primitive meteorology disguised in the robes of ritual. None of these explanations fully align with the site's deliberate secrecy or the carefully crafted acoustics. Most intriguing are the markings near the cliff's edge, spirals that differ subtly from those inside the chamber. One narrow spiral appears again and again, always pointing toward the horizon where the ocean swallows the setting sun. It is tempting to see in this repetition a form of coded instruction, a reminder perhaps that knowledge comes not from speaking, but from watching, waiting, and listening. Standing on the veiled coast today, one senses how the landscape itself collaborates in the mystery. Fog drifts like curtains through the carved entrances, muting the world until only the pulse of waves remains. The chambers fill with a hush so complete that even one's heartbeat seems intrusive. Whatever the Brotherhood sought signal, silence, or communion, they built their sanctuary where sound behaves strangely, and where the horizon feels like a threshold between the known and the unknowable. As we recall the manuscript's shifting diagrams from earlier, the parallels grow clear. Both hint at groups who saw patterns not in objects or relics, but in movement stars wandering overhead, tides rising and falling below, and perhaps, in both cases, secrecy was not a veil over forbidden knowledge, but a protection for insights too fragile to survive the noise of the wider world. The bloodless idol of the northern mire. In the northern wetlands, where mist rises from peat-like breath from a sleeping giant, there stands a relic unlike any other, a small idol carved from a fusion of bone, antler, and a material that defies clean classification. Locals in the region of Karelia once avoided that marsh, calling it the Mire of Quiet Eyes, a name passed down in lullabies, whispered more as warnings than comforts. The idol was discovered during a drainage survey in 1936, when workers clearing channels struck something solid buried beneath layers of wet moss. What they uncovered was a figure 1/2 meter tall, so slick with peat that its features seemed to shift with every angle of light. The idol's central body is human-like, but its face bears elongated eye sockets that widen unnaturally at the edges, and the crown of its head sprouts a wreath of antler branches seamlessly fused into its skull. No seam, no join, no obvious binding material. Modern imaging later revealed the antlers were shaped while still soft, meaning either the creature was carved from an animal shortly after death, or the bone was treated in a way not understood today. But the most disturbing aspect lies in the idol's surface. Its texture is smooth, polished by centuries of water, yet untouched by the staining typical of sacrificial objects. No blood traces, no burn residue, no cuts. For something crafted with such ritual intent, its cleanliness is unsettling. Radiocarbon analysis places the idol between 2,500 and 1,800 BCE, aligning it loosely with early forest cultures whose belief systems remain largely speculative. Most artifacts from that period share common motifs, sun symbols, animal spirits, fertility icons, but nothing quite resembles the hybrid form of the Maya idol. It is both person and beast, yet clearly neither. Around its neck is a groove suggesting something once hung there, perhaps a cord or charm now long dissolved. Beside it, archaeologists found wooden stakes arranged in a semicircle, each carved with deep vertical notches. Some interpret these as markers of seasonal rites. Others see them as territorial boundaries, perhaps a warning to outsiders. The quirky detail that haunts the excavation records came from the chief surveyor, a practical man with no taste for folklore. He noted that the peat surrounding the idol had a peculiar stratification layers, compressed in a pattern inconsistent with natural bog formation. Instead of forming gradually, the strata suggested sudden weight or pressure, as though something heavy had once stood near the idol for generations, shifting slightly over time. Yet no remains of such an object were found, just the stakes, the peat, and the figure watching from its cradle of mud. This detail invites speculation. Some have proposed the idol was the centerpiece of a ritual circle, perhaps one involving trance states induced by natural gases rising from the mire. Others argue that the idol marks the burial of an important figure whose organic remains dissolved completely in the acidic soil, but the absence of bones complicates that theory. Even in harsh wetlands, fragments of skeletal material usually persist. Here, nothing. Scholars still debate whether the idol commemorated a death, guarded a spirit, or embodied a presence that practitioners believed should remain undisturbed. The form itself raises questions. The elongated eyes could simply be stylized, a symbolic representation of watchfulness or inner sight. But some fringe theorists insist they reflect shamanic trance visions, claiming the idol captures the shape of entities seen during rituals involving psychoactive plants native to the region. Others see in the antler crown a representation of liminality, the boundary between human and animal life and decay. Still others suggest the idol was a forest intermediary, a guardian meant to negotiate with the spirits of the mire. Yet the idol's most perplexing feature is what is missing: evidence of intentional harm. Most prehistoric ritual objects show some sign of such treatment: scratches, offerings, cuts, or the telltale staining of repeated rites. The Maya idol shows none. It is as though ritual occurred around it, not upon it, a silent witness rather than a sacrificed intermediary. When we recall the Whispering Gate's quiet chamber, the charred manuscript's strange survival, and the Coastal Brotherhood's devotion to silence, a subtle pattern begins to emerge. These ancient occult mysteries share an almost paradoxical restraint. No grand altars drenched in ritual debris, no overt proclamations carved in stone. Instead, each leaves behind a whisper, a suggestion of belief rather than its full confession. The idol, mute and bloodless, embodies this restraint most powerfully. It invites interpretation, yet denies it at every turn. Standing at the edge of the northern mire today, one hears the soft popping of peat beneath the surface, like distant footsteps swallowed by mud. The air tastes of iron and damp vegetation. And there, in the center of the slow-breathing marsh, the idol remains unmoving, unyielding, and untouched by time's usual cruelty. It does not threaten, it does not explain, it simply watches, its long eyes fixed on a horizon we no longer perceive. Conclusion. Across these four enigmas, stone chambers, tuned to whispers, fire-scorched manuscripts that defy translation, cliffside sanctuaries carved for silent watchers, and idols preserved in the cold patience of peat, we encounter fragments of belief systems held together, not by spectacle, but by subtlety. None of these cultures left grand declarations of doctrine. None carved long texts explaining their rituals. They left, instead, hints: a hum in the wind, a diagram of wandering stars, a spiral facing the horizon, a figure whose eyes seem to follow both dusk and dawn. Each mystery reminds us that the ancient world was not a monolith of simple superstition. It was a web of small, deliberate choices, quiet acts of reverence, caution, or curiosity that echo across millennia. And perhaps that is why these objects unsettle us more than ruins drenched in myth. Their restraint forces us to imagine what words once surrounded them, what nights they illuminated, what fears they soothed or stirred. We recognize in them something deeply human, the desire to understand forces larger than ourselves, to mark the passage of time, to listen for patterns in silence. And though historians continue to debate their meanings, these relics endure not as puzzles waiting to be solved, but as reminders that mystery itself has always been part of our story, an inheritance passed from the unseen past to our uncertain present.